It's time to accelerate. Hi, this is Andy. Welcome to another edition of Frontline Friday with my regular and very special guest, Bridget Gleason. Now, before we get to the show, Bridget and I have a favor to ask of you. We'd really appreciate it if you took time right now to leave a review for this show on iTunes. And while you're there, click the button, subscribe to Accelerate. Make sure you get Frontline Friday automatically each week. Also, we need to hear from you. More specifically, we need your sales questions. I mean, what can we answer for you? What challenges do you have that we can help you with? So go to accelerate.fm/frontline and enter your question there. Each month, we're going to select one listener's question to be the question of the month. And the winner will receive a $50 Amazon gift card. So remember, go to accelerate.fm/frontline to give us your question and maybe win $50. So Bridget, how are you today?
As always, Andy, what's your guess?
You are fantastic.
I am fantastic. Yes, it's a good day. It's Friday. It's had a good week, had a good day, had a good month, had a good quarter. So all good.
And other than the fact that it's almost the 1st of April as we record this and it's snowing where you are.
Yeah. Don't remind me of that because I just talked to my son who said, it's going to be a beautiful weekend here. We're thinking about doing. I said, honey, stop. It's snowing. Let's not talk about that right now. Yeah. I'm still getting used to this. I'm still getting used to the California to Boston move. But I would say, all in all, even with the weather, super happy to be here.
Okay. Well, you should be getting used to it because you seem to be practicing it about every 2 years. You make that transition. So
I know. I know. That's right.
And so
I embrace that. I accept that. I embrace.
We're all about
change.
My quirks. We're all about change.
Uh-huh.
In fact, that's my new, I don't know, my new thing, but I mean, that's my thing. Change, right? It's all about change. Yeah, small changes, big results.
That's right.
So we have a guest today. Actually, this is the first for us here on Frontline Friday.
Yay!
Yes,
the first, but not the last.
Not the last. So joining us today, a very special guest, Chris Orlob, Senior Director Product Marketing at Gong.io. Chris, how are you today?
Just as Bridget, I am doing fantastic. How are you doing, Andy?
I'm doing great. And how's that new baby of yours?
She is a charmer. She gets that from her mother, I'm sure.
That was a good move. In case your wife is listening to this, very good move. Yes.
Very unlikely that she will, or that she is, or ever will. But maybe I'll direct her toward this to score a little points. Right?
Yeah.
There you go. Good idea.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say. I don't know. I know my son listens to this podcast. I don't know if any of them, other of my family members do, but he works for me, so he sort of has a vested interest. But I'm not sure my wife has ever listened to these, which is okay. So, Chris, there's a reason you're with us today, because this week you had sent me an article that you had written, and I read it, and I thought, wow, there's some really interesting data in here that you at Gong.io had sort of surfaced about the differences between genders and how they sell. And some of it was, I don't know, a little maybe counterintuitive, perhaps. So I thought, let's bring Chris on with myself, with Bridget, and let's talk about it.
Yeah. Do you want to do you want me to give a little bit of a precursor to how we surface the data?
Yeah, well, why don't you tell us, first of all, what made you want to even research it, and then, jump into methodology and so on.
So there are probably going to be a million caveats to all of this that I make throughout this entire conversation. First one is, I get asked all the time, why did you guys do this? What was the point of analyzing men against women? Why didn't you guys try to break this down between top, mid, and low performers? And the answer to that question is we already did that. So we wanted to move on to something else. And the idea behind Gong in general is we want to bring science to the sales conversation. And each gender has something we can learn from each other about how to sell more effectively because we're wired differently at a very fundamental level. So here's kind of the backstory behind how we do analysis. For this specific one, we analyzed 30,460 69 B2B sales calls using Gong's self-learning conversation analytics engine. These were not SDR calls. They were typically account executive calls done on platforms like GoToMeeting and WebEx and Zoom. Mm-hmm. All the calls were recorded and mapped to their CRM outcomes so that we could analyze against those outcomes. They were then transcribed from speech to text, analyzed with our AI engine to identify the patterns and insights that are leading to the highest win rates, most revenue, etc. On this one, we divided up between men and women to pretty much just see what happened. We were just kind of curious and found, like you said, a few counterintuitive insights that I'm sure we'll get into.
Okay. And when did you conduct the research?
This was done from late December until late January. So it was a little less than 30 days, and it was done with a very segmented, anonymous portion of our customer base.
Okay, so the calls were all recorded during that time frame.
Yes.
Okay. And B2B?
Mm-hmm. Okay. B2B, all software companies, all had within proximity of a 60-day sales cycle.
All software companies, you said?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's a good sort of caveat to throw in there, because arguably you could say that SaaS companies don't necessarily represent real world in all cases, compared to, somebody working for a manufacturer, small manufacturer located in the Midwest. It might have a different dynamic, but so it's worth pointing that out. Okay. Anything else?
Not really. We try to segment the analysis as finely tuned as we possibly can. Like I said, all of them had proximity of a 60-day sales cycle. All of them were in the same industry. There are some variables we just can't control, like what market are they selling into, and
sure.
We widely acknowledge that there are a ton of variables to this. That's why I've said correlation does not equal causation more times than I care to admit that I've said.
Well, I know, but that's not going to stop us. We're here to draw broad generalizations about this very specific data.
If you haven't listened to our show before, Chris, that's basically what we do. We draw broad generalizations, many which may be meaningless, but who knows? We'll let the audience decide.
Exactly.
Well, I think the whole, correlation causation thing gives the idea of correlation and negative connotation. And I don't think that's the case, because while it's a bad idea to jump to conclusions based off of a correlation, correlations still are a barometer that can point you in the right direction for the qualitative side of answering a question. Well, analytics are the qualitative side. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the things that's different here, though, is without jumping too deep into the mire about discussing correlation versus causality, is that normally the problem with correlation being used is then people correlate, certain data to causes, is that they're using it in a way that sort of confirms their bias, right? With the confirmation bias at work. Here, since we have some findings that are counterintuitive, the confirmation bias doesn't work in the same way. So correlations might actually be a little more pertinent than you might think otherwise. So anyway, let's jump into it. So the first fact that you have in here, or not fact, but finding you have from your research, we'll call it facts later, but findings in the research was that contrary to what you might think, that in the conversation you found that men talk less, listen more compared to the women.
Yeah, and I would put quotes around the word listen there.
Well, I understand, but you're talking about it.
No, I want to know why you put quotes around, because I looked at that and I thought that does not seem accurate. So when you put quotes around, why do you put quotes around?
So I put quotes around the word listen when I say men, quote unquote, listen less or more than women, because what's really happening is they're silent more often than women. But silent is not always indicative of effective listening.
Well, by the same token, you can say talking is not the same as communicating. So, it's we don't want to draw too fine of a line here.
No, but I think that actually is a really interesting distinction, because there is a difference. And I just think about the sales calls and conversations that I listen to as a manager. And you can easily tell when somebody is not talking, but they're waiting to jump in, so they're not really listening, and somebody who's listening. So that helps me understand what you're saying here. That's interesting.
Yeah, one of the kind of, before we get too far into the qualitative side of interpreting this data, I think one of my favorite examples of why this could be came from Tony Bennett, who's the VP of sales over at Terminus. And she said, this actually makes sense to me because when I see men not talking, sometimes they're like tossing around a Nerf ball throughout the office, or they're putting, mini golf thing around. But even though women, on paper talk more than men do, when they're not talking, they're often intently focused on the customer.
And you have no way, though, when you're looking at this data, you have no way to pick that up in what you're picking up at Gong, obviously. That's not something that you're able to determine.
Well,
yes, no, kind of?
I would say for the most part, no. So we can analyze things that help us determine if listening was effective, but it's still correlation, not causation. And an example of that is, what follow-up questions did somebody ask after the customer had responded, or did they accurately summarize the response that the customer gave? But really, in my opinion, the best way to answer the question is just use the analytics as a barometer to point you in the right direction for listening to the call recordings to decipher what the real story actually is.
Yeah. That's a great point.
Okay,
great point.
but let me make one last point on this before we move to the next point. Is that, and with all due respect to Tony Bennett, is it could just be that the men are listening more.
It could be.
I mean, we don't want to jump to the assumption that. Yeah,
I'm okay jumping to that.
Yeah, I know you are. Right.
Okay, I'm okay jumping to it. I read Chris's article and thought it was a surprise to me. So I'm happy to jump. I know you two aren't, but okay,
right.
Go ahead, Andy.
So let's indulge the stereotype that male account execs are all juvenile and have ADD and can't focus and and the women are all empathic and very intent on listening to what the customer says. Yeah, I
think what you said is actually really important, though, because you pointed out at the beginning of the discussion that they're counterintuitive insights. So we're not, we can't use our confirmation bias, but you just caught both Bridget and I using our confirmation bias. We believe that listening is the effective sales skill. So we're interpreting this data through the lens of, well, even though women are talking more, they're still listening more than men because they're paying attention. I think it's important what you said.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so the next thing you have, which I think ties to what we just talked about, is you found that men interrupt their prospects 4.2 times per hour, women 6.3 times per hour, or almost 50% more than men. So what's that tell us? Bridget?
Well, this is Bridget, you go ahead.
No, go ahead. I want to hear it first, because I got all kinds of confirmation biases going on.
Okay.
Warning bells.
So your answer is probably going to be more interesting than mine, because this is a stat where, frankly, I'm speechless. This is one where my only answer is correlation does not equal causation. What I'm not getting at is do not interrupt your customers more often as a way to increase your win rates, which we'll get to eventually. But with that unsaid, unpack it, Bridget.
Again, I will readily admit right here in front of both of you my confirmation bias. So some of what interrupting could be is keeping the conversation and keeping things on track, so that when somebody goes down a rabbit hole that's not worthwhile, that you keep bringing them back to center. You keep bringing it's a way of controlling the conversation and the meeting.
So women are doing it more frequently than men because
Because they're steering the conversation. See, but here's my bias. God, it's so horrible to have it like in my face as much as it is. Like, of course we do it better.
I'm enjoying this, by the way.
Of course you are. Of course we do it better. So everything I look at is, oh, there's got to be a reason why that's better. Where before, if it were reversed, I readily admit, well, yeah, you guys should stop interrupting.
I know you'd be going, booyah. Yeah, these men, they just can't. Exactly.
But now
yes.
I did that way. I think, oh, there must be some very noble reason. Well, so, I mean, it could be that we just interrupt more. Okay. And we shouldn't. 50% more, that's a lot more. And that's not good. If I were trying to find something positive, I would say, yeah, you're just trying to stop whoever's talking from wasting any more time than they're wasting.
Well, here's some context. So the context could be, because we don't have it necessarily in this. It could be that, the optimal, men do 4.2 times per hour, women do 6.3. It could be that the optimal number of interruptions you should be having in a sales conversation, maybe it's 8 times per hour. We don't know. So it's possible. It's possible that both men and women are underperforming in that regard in terms of keeping the conversation going the way it should be.
Well, another, just to play devil's advocate, is what if women have a higher win rate in spite of the fact that they're interrupting, or not because of it?
Well, no, but that was my point. Is maybe if we interrupted 8 times or 10 times, the win rate would be even higher.
Yeah. See,
so we're assuming interruptions. We're assuming interruptions are bad. Maybe interruptions are actually good.
Well, and I think Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I think his nuance on that is maybe it is bad, and they're doing other things that compensate. Yes. So maybe it's bad, but they still have better close rates.
Yeah, exactly. So what I was saying is simply because we saw that women interrupt higher or more than men and also have a higher win rate than men, well, we're assuming that interruptions, are one of the root cause variables of that higher win rate. But what if they have a higher win rate despite the fact that they are interrupting people? What if, because sales success isn't emergent. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of root causes of what actually leads to sales success. So maybe there's a bunch of other things, like Bridget said, that compensate for the fact that they are interrupting. Maybe they are a good thing, but maybe they're a bad thing.
Well, yeah, that was my point. Was we don't know. And we haven't really studied it. And because you think about it, again, you're in a conversation. Again, you're in a conversation with somebody. Think about your normal conversations with friends. If you're relaxed, and these people you really know, do you hesitate to interrupt? It's part of the give and take. And you're not being rude, right? It's not perceived as being rude. You're actually saying, I'm stepping in here because this is something. Just saying, before you take a step further, have you considered this, right? And it works, unless you have somebody that they obviously can be rude with interruptions. But I think back to conversations you have with customers. If you're really going at it, if you're really exploring something, that the interruption is just part of the conversation. I don't think we can make the judgment a priori that they're bad.
Yeah, I don't think we can either. I think it's just interesting to look at both sides. I think it would be interesting to dive into some of these top performing women's sales calls who have this streak of interruptions and find out what their context is of interrupting the customer. Because like Bridget said, maybe they're taking a customer who's about to go down to a rabbit hole and getting them back on track to having a productive conversation.
Exactly. And I think that one of the things that we need to think about is, in the broader sense, is that I think we could all agree that we've not come close as a profession and as individuals to optimizing our close rates.
No.
They could always be better. And so here is so funny how we jumped in to sort of automatically assume that interruptions are bad and they're succeeding in spite of. And I think since we're so far from optimizing our close rates, that really it's worth some more inspection to say, well, maybe we really do need to be interrupting more.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe those challenger sale guys are onto something.
Well, maybe.
Well, I mean, I think that's a different context, but it's right. I mean, it's not that you're always challenging, but it's your guiding. And I think Bridget was really onto something. So maybe we need to have more. Well, anyway, we'll get back to that. So, but sort of along with that, I mean, you have talked about a stat that I didn't think was real meaningful about men pausing longer before responding than women on average, given the differential was fairly slight. And anyway, did anybody else find that meaningful?
No, it was just something to, it went into the theme with the rest of the research. So threw that in there.
Yeah, I mean,
men pause slightly longer. They pause 0.2 seconds longer on average before responding to the customer. It would be hard to draw any conclusions based on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And then you said that women go on monologues, and that's in quote, longer and more often than men do. And you meant I'm sorry, I can't speak tonight. Uninterrupted streak of talking without the customer chiming in.
Mm-hmm.
So you said men average 116 seconds when they go on a monologue. Women average 130 seconds.
Yes.
So Bridget, what do you think of that? That just those durations seem like an awful long time for someone to be talking without interacting with the other party.
Yeah, they're probably both too long. And again, okay, I have a strong confirmation bias if we haven't already figured that out. Yeah, that one, it's hard for me. It's actually hard for me to spin this one positively because I just never think of that as a good sign. I mean, I would look at that and think, that's an area to improve.
Yeah, your monologue there only went 21 seconds. So,
see,
keep in mind, this is something that wasn't included in the article, but a monologue can have very minor directives or like one-word answers within it, and we still counted that as a monologue. So it's not necessarily totally uninterrupted, but the prospect may respond with a yes or no answer to it in the middle of it somewhere.
Right. I would count that. That's good.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. I mean, there's going to be acknowledgement and so on, as you said, throughout the entire thing. So were there certain word categories or word types that were prevalent during these monologues?
There may be, but none that we had surfaced or decided to dive into, but I kind of wish we had now that you had asked the question, because it's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this doesn't really surprise me. I mean, and I don't think it's, other than, as Bridget and I said, it seems long in actuality. I'm not sure the difference means much.
The customer's not paying attention past some point,
Well, to some degree, that's exactly right.
The extra 14 seconds the women have on this one, the customer had tuned out by that point anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if it takes you 2 minutes to ask a question that requires a thoughtful response, then your setup is a little too long. You need to spend some time watching stand-up comics and how they set up their jokes. I mean, it's you have to be more concise than that.
Yeah, I think the only interpretation that I can possibly unpack, which is nothing more than a qualitative hypothesis, is another female sales leader friend of mine. She had an observation, and she noticed that when males tend to go on these monologues, they're often irrelevant. But when females do,
I don't know why you're laughing, because you know what? She's got the same confirmation bias I do. Because I have to tell you, Chris, that ran through my mind. It's like, well, yeah, they're not saying anything. At least we're saying something.
They're talking about. I didn't want to say. Yeah. The other side to her point was when females go on these quote unquote monologues, even though she still recommended that they be shorter. They're telling a customer story, or they're making strong selling points, or something that packs a little bit more of a punch than talking about their weekend.
Yeah. It's so funny how we
they're so strong.
They're so strong, and the points they're making are so relevant, and the guys are, just blah 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 and catching their Nerf balls, and
I know, and just multitasking and not paying any attention. Well, I know they really need to learn something from us.
Right. So speaking about that is, when I talked to groups, and I talked to one just a couple weeks ago at a national sales meeting for a big electronics manufacturer, and had people in the audience raise their hands, and pretty even mixed between men and women in the audience, about who looks at their phone when they're making calls, right? Who looks at their personal phone, whether if they get a push notification or buzzes, they all do, 100%. And this is a whole separate conversation we've had, and we'll have again at some point about not multitasking, but I haven't seen any behaviors that are evenly distributed among men and women. Bad behaviors.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's just, we have the good behaviors too. That's the only difference. We all have the bad, but we've got a lock on the good behaviors.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case.
I'm sure that's the case, right? Chris's study hasn't really broken that out yet. That'll be the next one.
Well, yeah.
Sure. Well, it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, we're getting
that's
to that.
Right. It'll all come clean.
So, all right. So let's start here in the last few minutes we have. Let's start getting down to some of the results, at least that Gong.io was able to track. So, headline saying, despite these broken rules, women close more deals. And so you're saying your data set that men had a 49% likelihood of moving opportunities to the next stage, while women boasted a 54% rate. Mm-hmm. And women's win rates were 11% higher than men on average.
Yeah, I think that's an important loop to close on this story for the audience, as we've talked about all these counterintuitive things that women are doing on sales calls that at first glance you would think are bad, at least on paper, yet they have these sales outcomes that are, at least in this group, superior to men.
Which has actually been documented before. I've had Lori Richardson, who's the head of Women Sales Pros, on the show a few times, and actually coming on again very shortly. And yeah, there's research that's out there saying that women, on balance, have higher close rates than men in sales.
Yes.
Which is always the topic of our conversation, which is why aren't there more women that available, or why aren't more companies hiring more women to be in sales? Which is, a more complex issue.
Because women, they don't want the job. They don't want the environment. That's a whole other issue.
Yeah, one other issue, right? Absolutely.
I'm interested to hear your take on that. Like, why you said they don't want the environment? Could you unpack what you mean by that?
In a lot of cases, it's still very much kind of a male-dominated, oftentimes a locker room. And it can be even you look at job descriptions.
Exactly. We need extroverts. We need aggressive. We need hunters. They're all testosterone-laden descriptions, as opposed to, hey, we need an analytical, thoughtful problem solver.
Right. And I think women look at it and they don't identify with that tribe. That's not my tribe. It does not my tribe for me. If I say I need a hunter, aggressive, we're going to open up, we're going to have the war room. It's not something most women identify with. And so I think even if it's subconscious, that's not my tribe. Those aren't my people. And so I think they self-select out for the most part. Mm-hmm. And I know when I hire, I don't look specifically for a man or a woman, but there are far, 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 far fewer women candidates, and it gets smaller and more narrow as I go sort of up the chain.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'm looking at this through the product marketer's lens now, specifically the job description. And, a job description can just be looked at as messaging. And I can see why that would resonate strongly for a male, a testosterone-laden male, as you said, Andy, and repel a woman.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's one of the real issues, and that this, as Bridget said, sort of happens at a subconscious level, is this locker room mentality sort of gets perpetuated. And yeah, I mean, there was a big survey done by a major insurance company about how to try to get more women into sales, and what we find is it's not only starting with sort of the job description, but that what this study found is that women were discriminated against on the basis of who got which accounts. I think Bureau of Labor Statistics has shown that women in sales actually earn less than their male counterparts for doing the same work, which we know is an issue. So, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why we're women are sort of not encouraged to go into the profession, which is really a shame because, it's not just what you found, but other studies. If I were running a sales team like Bridget right now, I'd be focusing on finding women to sell.
Yeah, I can focus, but it's still hard.
Yeah, well, they're not available.
They're not available. And so when I look at, hiring quotas that I have, and even if they're self-imposed and timelines, I'm always hiring, I'm always looking, I'm always interviewing, and the numbers are small. It's challenging for sure.
Well, hopefully that with more, university level, college level degrees, actually, not just courses, but degrees in sales becoming more available, is that hopefully that is one sort of function that encourages more women to get into the profession, because it really would help a lot of companies if you can bring in a whole cohort of employees that, at least based on some studies that we're seeing, and something really interesting that you've gone with Gong.io, not that people would say it's an academic study, but it gives you an indication that, you're really missing a boat if you're a hiring manager in sales and you're not actively looking to encourage women to come into the profession.
Completely agree.
Yes.
So Chris.
Here. Plus one.
So Chris, this was fantastic. We really appreciate you joining us. We'll have you back on again sometime. Yeah,
this was fun. Thank you for having me.
Well,
it was great, Chris. Thank you.
The key is just keep writing interesting stuff.
I certainly try.
All right. Well, if you guys do that, you've got an open invitation to come on Frontline Friday as part of Accelerate and talk about what you've done.
We'll keep that in mind. Like I said, this was a blast.
Well, good. Well, we enjoyed it. Bridget, as always, marvelous to talk to you. And we'll be back next Friday.
All right, everybody, have a good one.
All right, everybody. Talk to you next week.